I don't know what the is going on. I feel like Sophie's looking for someone to blame for her relationship problems with Pedro, but she's not gonna put the blame. All my past relationships, the focus was never really on anything I wanted to do. When I was with Ed, he was such a princess. It was always fine dining.
When a woman is really interested in a man, she is going to do anything she can do to impress this man and be with that. You're really love. You are really love. So
don't tell me that because that made me like stupid.
No. You are not stupid. It's not your fault.
After my divorce, I promised to myself that I'm not going to be with somebody else, that's not getting along with my family. I have strong feelings with Sophie, but she told me she wants to date other people. And now she's been testing me non-stop. Like, how you doing? Are you okay? Are you mad?
Right from the start, the tension is almost tangible. Sophie's frustration isn't subtle. It's brimming over, spilling into every interaction around her. She's convinced that Liz has meddled in her personal life, steering Pedro away from her, and in her mind, the blame is crystal clear. But the reality? It's messier, more complicated, and that's exactly what makes it gripping. The audience is immediately pulled into Sophie's inner storm, wondering, is this all a misunderstanding, or is there something deeper going on here? Sophie's explosive energy draws attention, but it also plants questions. Why now? Why is she so reactive at this exact moment? And more importantly, how much of this anger is truly about Liz, and how much is a reflection of her own insecurities? Meanwhile, across the room, Gino is carelessly playing with fire in a completely different way. His relationship with Natalie has been rocky, and he seems determined to undermine his own credibility. He's out in the open, making disclosures that he probably shouldn't, while Natalie's friends are watching him closely. Every word he says risks altering their perception of him, and he's teetering on the edge between vulnerability and self-sabotage. What's fascinating here is how his behavior mirrors patterns we've seen before, repeating mistakes, not fully owning up to past issues, and yet thinking things will turn out differently this time. The audience is left wondering, will Natalie see him as trustworthy, or is this confession the beginning of a deeper problem? Sophie's immediate reaction to Liz is sharp and accusatory. There's no softening, no small talk, no attempt to understand. It's a full-on emotional eruption. She's not just angry, she's feeling betrayed. And that sense of betrayal fuels every word. But beneath the surface, there's a fear at work. Fear that she's losing control over her relationship, that Pedro's attention is slipping, and that her own choices have contributed to this tension. This combination of fear and projection is what makes Sophie so unpredictable. The audience is hooked because the behavior is raw, human, and relatable in its intensity, even if it's extreme. Liz, on the other hand, is caught completely off guard. She's there to support her friend, to help navigate a complicated romantic landscape, and yet suddenly, she's the target. The dynamic flips expectations. Normally, the friend offering guidance is the stabilizing force, but here, Liz becomes a lightning rod for Sophie's frustration. This sets up a layered conflict. It's not just about a romantic relationship gone wrong, it's about trust, miscommunication, and the fragility of friendships when emotions run high. The tension escalates with every brief exchange, each glance loaded with implication. Each pause pregnant with unsaid words. Mini cliffhanger. Every second we spend with Sophie's glare is a question. Will she push the confrontation further or step back before it shatters the friendship completely? At the same time, Gino's storyline introduces a parallel tension that heightens the emotional stakes. He's at Natalie's friend's gathering, trying to navigate social perception while unknowingly digging a deeper hole for himself. His decision to reveal that women have been writing him creates immediate doubt. The audience is left to speculate. Is this honesty, or is it recklessness disguised as transparency? And how will Natalie react when she hears about it, directly or secondhand? Layered open loops emerge naturally, his intentions are unclear, the consequences are pending, and the emotional fallout is just starting to take shape. Every move Gino makes is a small test of trust, and the audience feels the tension as if they were in the room themselves. The psychological dimension is subtle but essential. Sophie's behavior is a classic mix of insecurity and projection. She's lashing out at Liz not simply because of what Liz may have done, but because of what Sophie fears losing, control over Pedro, and control over her own narrative. Gino, on the other hand, displays a pattern of self-sabotage sabotage and avoidance of accountability. By confessing to things at the wrong time in front of the wrong people, he amplifies the stakes without realizing it. Both storylines converge on a central theme: how insecurity and miscommunication can escalate minor issues into full-blown crises. The audience is drawn into this dual tension, emotionally aligning with both the fear of betrayal and the risk of self-inflicted damage. Every interaction in this act carries weight. Sophie's words are sharp, but there are pauses where doubt creeps in. Subtle gestures that suggest she's questioning her own reactions even as she lashes out. Gino's body language mirrors his precarious position, hesitation, nervous energy, overcompensation, all signs that he's aware at some level that he might be crossing a line. These visual and verbal cues are what make the narrative binge-worthy. They create layers of emotional complexity, giving viewers something to analyze, predict, and emotionally invest in. Mini cliffhanger. What will Sophie do next when Liz finally responds? And will Gino's moment of openness backfire catastrophically, or does Natalie forgive him again? The stakes continue to rise because the consequences aren't immediate, but they are looming. Sophie's confrontation could fracture a friendship permanently. Liz's ability to defend herself is limited by Sophie's emotional intensity. For Gino, every word spoken is a potential pivot point in the relationship with Natalie. The audience is suspended in this state of uncertainty, craving resolution, yet the resolution remains just out of reach. The tension is compounded by the fact that both storylines mirror each other psychologically: fear of loss, trust issues, and self-protective behavior, but the outcomes are dependent on the reactions of others, not the instigators themselves. This makes each interaction unpredictable, and unpredictability drives retention. Then there's Pedro, an unseen but omnipresent influence in the Sophie-Liz conflict. Every accusation Sophie levels carries an unspoken question: what does Pedro actually think? The audience is left in a state of anticipation, filling in gaps, debating motivations, and predicting reaction. These unspoken questions act as emotional hooks, keeping viewers invested because the answers are not yet revealed. At the same time, the dual tension of Gino and Sophie in separate storylines creates a cross-cutting effect. Each escalation in one plotline mirrors and amplifies the other, keeping the audience emotionally engaged on multiple levels. Mini cliffhanger: if Sophie pushes further, will Liz finally confront her openly, or will she retreat to protect herself? Meanwhile, how much longer can Gino maintain credibility before Natalie intervenes? By the end of this act, the audience is fully immersed in high-stakes drama. Sophie storms off the bar in frustration, leaving Liz bewildered and emotionally unsettled, and the tension between them is unresolved. Across the storyline, Gino's credibility with Natalie is hanging by a thread, with every friend's opinion acting as a potential tipping point. The psychological insight is clear. Unchecked insecurities, combined with repeated mistakes and poor communication, create emotional pressure cookers that threaten relationships and friendships simultaneously. Open loops abound, moral tension is unresolved, and curiosity about how each character will react continues to spike. The stage is set for further escalation. Viewers are left with multiple questions that demand answers in the next act. Will Sophie recognize her own role in the conflict? Can Liz maintain her boundaries without causing further fallout? And most importantly, will Gino's candidness lead to trust rebuilding or ultimate rejection? As this act closes, the story doesn't pause, it pivots. Sophie's anger has reached a peak, Gino teeters on the edge of relationship ruin, and the audience is left balancing anticipation, judgment, and emotional investment. Every thread introduced here is primed for exploration where curiosity deepens, new details emerge, and the consequences of these early tensions begin to ripple outward. The emotional stakes have been set, the open loops planted, and the audience is left in suspense, waiting to see which sparks ignite next. The story deepens as unfold, shifting focus from immediate shock to the simmering confusion and complexity beneath Sophie and Gino's actions. For Sophie, the raw intensity of her outburst at Liz gives way to a quieter, more insidious frustration. She's not just angry, she's unsettled, unsure where the real betrayal lies, and the audience immediately senses this layered uncertainty. Is Pedro truly pulling away because of Liz's warnings, or is Sophie projecting her own insecurities onto her friend? Every glance, every pause, every hesitant word from Sophie becomes a subtle window into her mind, and viewers are drawn into this emotional labyrinth, trying to untangle what is projection, what is paranoia, and what is real. The narrative now leans into the psychological tension. Human beings often misattribute blame, and Sophie is a textbook example, seeing sabotage where there may be none, assuming malice instead of miscommunication, and creating chaos in an attempt to regain a sense of control. Meanwhile, Liz is navigating a different kind of pressure. She's in the crosshairs of Sophie's suspicion, trying to assert her intentions without inflaming the situation further. This is where the narrative complexity increases. Liz is aware she's being judged unfairly, yet her choices carry consequences, whether she acts or stays silent. Every explanation she offers risks being interpreted as defensiveness or guilt, and every gesture of goodwill might be twisted in Sophie's eyes. The tension here is not explosive, but psychological. The slow burn of frustration that comes from being misunderstood. Liz's attempts to clarify her side are subtly undermined by Sophie's immaturity, yet the audience is forced to consider whether Liz's influence is truly as powerful as Sophie believes, or if it's all a projection fueled by Sophie's fear of losing Pedro. Across the parallel narrative, Gino's missteps add another layer of tension. His earlier admissions about being contacted by other women were intended as honesty, but they opened doors to doubt and mistrust. Natalie's perception of Gino is now suspended between curiosity and suspicion. The audience senses the precariousness of his situation. Honesty can build trust, but timing and context are everything. Gino's recurring patterns, past lies, omissions, and boundary-crossing behavior resurface in Natalie's mind, even if they are only implied, reminding viewers that humans rarely operate in a vacuum. His credibility is not just at stake in a single moment, it's cumulative, a thread stretched thin by repeated errors. Every hesitation, awkward gesture, or rationalization on Gino's part becomes a microdrama, leaving the audience constantly questioning whether he will recover or further damage the fragile trust he's trying to rebuild. Sophie's immaturity is highlighted through a combination of thought patterns and behavior. She's quick to jump to conclusions, slow to consider evidence, and highly reactive to perceived slights. Even small interactions are filtered through a lens of suspicion and fear, amplifying minor incidents into significant conflict. Liz, for her part, is navigating this minefield with care but also visible frustration. There's the tension of wanting to defend herself while also maintaining the friendship. The push and pull here creates a layered emotional dynamic. The audience is engaged not by overt drama alone, but by the psychological nuance of two people caught in a cycle of misinterpretation, resentment, and unspoken tension. Mini cliffhanger, Sophie's next move feels unpredictable, making every interaction feel charged with potential escalation. Gino's subplot mirrors Sophie's psychological complexity in an interesting way. Both storylines explore repeated patterns of self-sabotage and trust erosion. While Sophie externalizes her fear, projecting blame outward, Gino internalizes it, manifesting through awkward honesty and poor timing. This contrast amplifies the psychological texture of giving viewers multiple angles to engage with. They can empathize with Sophie's confusion, critique her immaturity, or analyze Gino's unintentional undermining of his own relationships. The dual perspective keeps emotional tension high, as the audience is compelled to weigh character intentions, predict consequences, and anticipate where the next misstep will land. Each small decision by either character is an emotional lever, subtly ratcheting up the stakes and keeping retention strong. The act deepens engagement through layered open loops. Sophie's misattributed anger creates question. Is Pedro the target of her frustration, or is Liz the real scapegoat? The audience is drawn into this ambiguity, analyzing every word, gesture, and pause for insight. Similarly, Gino's honesty about other women creates anticipation. Will Natalie confront him privately, or will this simmer unresolved? The act capitalizes on the human tendency to anticipate outcomes while second-guessing motives, encouraging viewers to remain emotionally invested. Mini cliffhanger, with Sophie's mistrust simmering and Gino's credibility precarious, the audience is left guessing which relationships will fracture first and how each character will respond to the next provocation. Psychologically illustrates a recurring human flaw. the tendency to repeat past mistakes despite awareness of consequences. Sophie's behavior shows that awareness of a problem does not always translate into corrective action. She cycles through insecurity, projection, and reactive behavior in ways that are predictable yet fascinating to watch. Gino's patterns demonstrate a similar principle in relationships: mismanagement of honesty, misjudged timing, and habitual avoidance of accountability create tension that could have been avoided. These mirrored tendencies heighten narrative engagement, providing viewers with multiple layers of psychological insight that deepen the emotional investment in both storylines. It's the subtle human error drama that sustains curiosity beyond surface-level conflict. As interactions unfold, the social environment adds additional tension. Sophie and Liz's exchanges are observed not just by themselves, but by peers, friends, and by extension, the audience. Every misread glance, awkward pause, and misinterpreted comment becomes fuel for speculation. Gino's interactions with Natalie's friends similarly amplify stakes. Their perception of his character, filtered through his own missteps, directly affects his credibility. These social dimensions create a web of accountability, perception, and interpretation, keeping viewers engaged because outcomes are uncertain and consequences ripple outward unpredictably. Mini cliffhanger: any comment, question, or gesture could trigger an escalation that changes the trajectory of both storylines. By the midpoint of, emotional tension is firmly established, yet resolution remains distant. Sophie's sense of betrayal and Liz's defensive positioning create a volatile mixture, while Gino's credibility hangs in the balance with Natalie. Open questions multiply. Is Sophie's anger justified or misplaced? Will Liz manage to protect herself without alienating her friend? How will Gino navigate the fallout from revealing his interactions with other women? Each question is an invitation for viewers to keep watching, as the psychological stakes build alongside interpersonal tension. The narrative deliberately refuses closure here, creating what cognitive scientists call curiosity gap, uncertainty that compels continued attention. Layered storytelling continues with subtle foreshadowing. Sophie's next move could either escalate the conflict dramatically or reset the dynamic temporarily, but viewers don't know which. Gino's next interaction with Natalie is similarly loaded. A confrontation is implied but not yet revealed, creating anticipation. These layers of suspense are interwoven with the psychological narrative, emphasizing the human cost of miscommunication, projection, and repeated mistakes. The audience is encouraged to predict outcomes, debate motives, and emotionally invest in the consequences, which is the hallmark of long-form retention strategy. Mini cliffhanger: as Sophie stews in unresolved mistrust and Gino prepares for a private reckoning with Natalie, the tension is palpable, almost unbearable. The act closes with unresolved emotional arcs, maintaining maximum retention pressure. Sophie's immaturity and distrust continue to destabilize her relationship landscape, leaving Liz in a constant defensive stance. Gino's credibility, while momentarily intact, is fragile, teetering on the edge of conflict once private conversations occur. Both storylines reinforce the act's psychological core. People often misattribute blame, repeat mistakes, and mismanage trust, creating tension that is as compelling as it is relatable. The stage is perfectly set for where division intensifies, perspectives clash, and fan reactions are further polarized. The narrative leaves viewers on edge, fully aware that the next escalation could shift alliances, reveal hidden motives, or shatter tenuous trust completely. Dives headfirst into the chaos that emerges when perspectives collide, and moral ambiguity saturates every interaction. Sophie, having already unleashed her frustration in and allowed it to simmer through, now shifts from private resentment to a more public display. At the bar, her behavior becomes performative, almost theatrical, as she flirts openly with a man across the room. Every glance, laugh, and casual touch is loaded with tension, not just between her and Pedro, but between Sophie and Liz, who watches silently from the sideline. This is where the emotional stakes escalate. The audience is confronted with a dilemma. On one hand, Sophie's actions could be seen as playful, a coping mechanism for her confusion and insecurity. On the other hand, it is undeniably provocative and hurtful to those emotionally invested, particularly Liz, whose intentions have been misinterpreted at every turn. The act leverages this ambiguity, leaving viewers questioning who is right and who is wrong, and inviting them to take sides emotionally. exactly the kind of moral tension that sustains binge-worthy engagement. Liz, meanwhile, is caught in an impossible position. She wants to defend herself, clarify intentions, and preserve her friendship, but the social dynamics are stacked against her. Sophie's public display of irritation and jealousy creates an immediate imbalance. Any attempt at reason is framed as manipulation or interference. Here, the psychological tension becomes palpable. Liz has to manage both her own emotions, frustration, hurt, confusion, and the perception of Sophie and bystanders. Each word she utters could be misconstrued, escalating the conflict further. This mirrors real human experiences. Even when intentions are pure, context and perception can warp interactions, producing a spiral of misunderstanding. Mini cliffhanger, viewers are left questioning whether Liz can find a way to communicate effectively without inflaming Sophie further, or if this friendship is already fractured beyond repair. The act simultaneously explores Gino's parallel struggle with trust and accountability. Earlier admissions about being contacted by other women now loom over him like a specter. Natalie's perception of him teeters between curiosity, suspicion, and frustration. Each attempt by Gino to rationalize his behavior, trying to explain, justify, or downplay past mistakes, has the opposite effect, subtly undermining his credibility. The psychological angle here is critical. Gino demonstrates a classic human flaw of attempting to manage perceptions without fully taking accountability. The tension is compounded because Natalie's response is nonverbal in many moments. A raised eyebrow, a pause, a measured tone, which forces the audience to read between the lines. This ambiguity keeps viewers engaged, building anticipation for when confrontation becomes unavoidable. Mini cliffhanger, the question of whether Natalie will forgive Gino or set firm boundaries remains unresolved, increasing suspense and emotional investment. As Sophie's behavior escalates, the act emphasizes the psychological drivers behind her action. She's seeking validation in multiple directions simultaneously. A test of Pedro's feelings, an assertion of independence, and a demonstration of power over the social dynamics around her. The audience can sense the tension between her internal need for reassurance and the external consequences of her action. Each interaction is a gamble. One misread gesture could alienate Pedro further, ruin a potential friendship, or push Liz into a defensive stance that Sophie cannot control. This interplay between personal insecurity and the desire for social dominance fuels the drama. Mini cliffhanger, Sophie's next interaction could either deepen the divide irreversibly or offer a fleeting chance for reconciliation. Gino's subplot mirrors these dynamics in an interesting way. While Sophie externalizes tension through provocative behavior, Gino internalizes tension through over-explaining and mismanaging trust. His need to rationalize past actions to Natalie reveals a deeper insecurity. He craves validation while fearing judgment. This duality is psychologically rich. The audience is forced to watch a character self-sabotage while being aware that his intentions are not malicious, only poorly executed. Every conversation, hesitated response, and awkward justification becomes a miniature drama, layered with potential consequences. Mini cliffhanger, whether Gino can navigate this delicate balance without alienating Natalie entirely is unknown, keeping viewers invested. Social dynamics further complicate both storylines. Sophie's public flirting draws reactions not only from Liz, but also from onlookers, adding a layer of performative accountability. Peer observation creates implicit pressure. Sophie must negotiate between personal desire and social perception, a psychological tension that is universally relatable. Gino's interactions, though more private, are also influenced by social context. His credibility is measured not just in Natalie's perception, but through her friends' subtle cues and judgments. Both storylines emphasize that trust, perception, and influence operate on multiple levels, creating complex narrative tension. Mini cliffhanger, any misstep, public or private, could drastically shift alliances and emotional balance. The act also highlights the moral complexity of human behavior. Sophie's actions are frustrating to watch, yet they are not entirely unjustifiable. Her insecurity, fear of loss, and misinterpretation of social cues create behavior that seems reckless but is psychologically consistent. Gino, too, is morally ambiguous. His past mistakes and poorly timed honesty make him appear unreliable, yet he is actively attempting to manage accountability. These mirrored moral tensions invite divided audience reactions, a powerful retention tool. Viewers are compelled to discuss, debate, and align themselves with one side or another. Mini cliffhanger: which side will prevail in perception? The impulsive insecurity of Sophie or the flawed honesty of Gino? The emotional tension is escalated by the layering of perspectives. Sophie, Liz, Gino, and Natalie each have different interpretations of events and motives, and these interpretations collide. The narrative invites the audience to analyze conflicting information, detect subtle cues, and predict outcomes. Psychological insight comes into play as viewers see how projection, selective attention, and confirmation bias influence each character's decision. Sophie interprets Liz's actions through a lens of assumed malice. Liz frames Sophie's behavior as reactionary and misinformed. Gino misjudges how honesty and past patterns affect Natalie's trust. Each character is trapped by their perception, escalating the stakes. Mini cliffhanger: the audience anticipates whether these misalignments can be reconciled or if they will ignite further conflict. As the act progresses, the stakes shift from personal insecurity to social and relational consequence. Sophie's misbehavior threatens not just her connection with Pedro, but also her social standing and friendships. Liz's struggle to defend herself without inflaming the situation raises questions about loyalty, communication, and the limits of patience. Gino's precarious position threatens the budding trust with Natalie, potentially undoing weeks of progress. The narrative capitalizes on this multi-layered escalation, ensuring that every scene carries potential consequences that ripple outward unpredictably. Mini cliffhanger: if any single character acts impulsively, the ripple effect could redefine relationships permanently. By the close of, tension reaches a critical inflection point. Sophie ignores Liz entirely, choosing to engage in public flirtation and internalize her perceived grievances, leaving the friendship fractured in real time. Gino, simultaneously, faces the prospect of a private confrontation with Natalie, a reckoning that could either restore or permanently damage trust. The moral stakes, emotional instability, and conflicting perspectives ensure that the audience remains fully invested. All open loops introduced earlier, Sophie's escalation, Liz's defense, Natalie's potential boundaries remain unresolved, compelling viewers to continue watching. The psychological tension is layered, the audience grapples with empathy, judgment, and anticipation, creating an immersive viewing experience that drives retention. Mini cliffhanger: Sophie's next move and Gino's upcoming confrontation promise to escalate both drama and viewer investment, setting the stage perfectly for consequence pressure. The aftermath of hits immediately, and the air is thick with tension. Sophie's choices no longer feel like private quirks, they now have tangible consequences. The playful flirtation at the bar, the cold shoulder toward Liz, and her insistence on blaming others have all begun to ripple outward, and the social and emotional stakes are growing with every passing moment. The narrative shifts from observation of behavior to the consequences of it. Sophie, for the first time in this episode, begins to experience that gnawing awareness that actions have effects. Her manipulative tendencies, which previously felt contained, are now visible to everyone around her. Friends, onlookers, and the very people she is trying to influence. It's here that the psychological layer deepens. The act of seeking validation from multiple sources, while ignoring honest feedback, starts to backfire. Mini cliffhanger: will Sophie even recognize that she is the architect of her own frustration, or will she continue to misattribute blame? Liz, who has been the steadying force throughout the turmoil, now faces her own emotional fallout. Watching Sophie spiral while maintaining composure is draining, but the real weight comes from the moral tension. She wants to support her friend, yet the social optics are stacked against her. Every attempt to clarify intentions is met with cold indifference or hostility. Liz experiences that unique form of relational fatigue, the kind that comes when you are blamed for outcomes you didn't create, yet are still held responsible. Her frustration is palpable, but it's a layered frustration. It's not just about Sophie's behavior, it's about how much effort goes unrecognized when intentions are misread. This is an important retention driver. The audience can feel Liz's exasperation and anticipates whether she will reach a breaking point. Mini cliffhanger: How long can Liz continue to support Sophie without her own emotions tipping the balance? Meanwhile, Gino's narrative arc escalates as he faces the fallout of his own missteps. The confessions and half-truths that seemed manageable in private now loom large in Natalie's eyes. His repeated dishonesty, whether through omission or rationalization, has eroded the foundation of trust he's trying to rebuild. The psychological tension here is subtle but powerful. Gino wants validation and connection, yet he repeatedly engages in behaviors that undermine both. Every gesture he makes is under scrutiny. Every attempt at closeness is weighed against a backdrop of past misjudgment. Mini cliffhanger. Will Natalie forgive him and continue to invest in the relationship, or will she enforce boundaries that permanently limit their connection? As the fallout unfolds, Sophie's social circle begins to react. Julia, who has attempted mediation, starts to see the consequences of Sophie's manipulative behavior firsthand. Sophie's insistence on controlling perceptions and her refusal to consider alternate perspectives have alienated those closest to her. This is where cause and effect become psychologically compelling. Actions that initially seemed minor, flirtation, cold shoulder, misdirected blame, are now producing significant social consequences. Julia's intervention is no longer just advisory, it's a corrective force against a pattern of repeated misbehavior. Mini cliffhanger. Will Sophie heed Julia's advice, or is she too entrenched in her own narrative to see the impact? Gino's confrontation with Natalie adds another layer of emotional intensity. In private, Natalie expresses her frustration and doubt, questioning whether past patterns of dishonesty will continue. Gino, in turn, tries to explain, rationalize, and reassure, but the more he speaks, the more he risks alienating her. This is a critical moment in the act. The audience is given insight into how repeated behavior, even when mitigated by good intentions, can accumulate and generate distrust. The psychological tension comes from anticipation. Viewers are actively weighing the probability of reconciliation against the likelihood of lasting damage. Mini cliffhanger. Natalie's decision is not revealed immediately, leaving the audience hanging on every word. Sophie's behavior, contrasted with Gino's, illustrates the multi-dimensional nature of consequence. While Gino's actions are private, Sophie's are public, affecting social perception and emotional alignment among her peers. The audience sees cause and effect in real time. The manipulative behavior that once granted her temporary control is now isolating her from friends and potentially from Pedro. Each reaction she provokes is a mirror to her own insecurities. Psychological insight is layered here. By creating conflict to test loyalty or influence outcomes, Sophie inadvertently undermines the relationship she seeks to protect. Mini cliffhanger. How will she navigate the growing isolation before consequences escalate further? Emotional tension continues to mount as Liz navigates her role. She wants to be supportive, but repeated blame and misattribution are wearing her down. This creates a compelling narrative tension. Viewers understand the emotional labor she is performing and anticipate a tipping point. Will she step back entirely, or continue to intervene despite personal cost? Liz's struggle embodies a universal relational question. How long should one remain the voice of reason when the recipient refuses to acknowledge reality? Mini cliffhanger. Liz's next choice could redefine her relationships with Sophie and Pedro permanently. Gino's arc and Sophie's arc intersect thematically in this act. Both are facing the consequences of past actions, yet the stakes manifest differently. For Gino, it is trust and intimacy with a single partner. For Sophie, it is social perception, friendship, and romantic leverage. Psychologically, the parallel emphasizes patterns of repeated behavior and the inevitability of accountability. Every misstep, every avoidance of direct communication adds weight to the unfolding drama. Mini cliffhanger. The audience is left questioning whether these characters can break their self-sabotaging cycles, or if the consequences will become permanent. The act also leans heavily into anticipation and judgment. Viewers are positioned as moral commentators, weighing the fairness of Sophie's actions against Gino's mistakes. This dual-track narrative keeps engagement high because it activates both emotional empathy and analytical reasoning. Sophie's flirtation and coldness create outrage, frustration, and curiosity. Will she continue escalating or self-correct? Gino's rationalizations create suspense. Will he recover Natalie's trust or cement a lasting fracture? Each moment contains potential for dramatic payoff, creating micro cliffhangers that sustain retention. Mini cliffhanger. The audience remains on edge, wondering which character's trajectory will bend toward resolution first. As the act progresses, stakes intensify. Sophie's manipulations start threatening her relationships with both friends and romantic partners. Liz is forced to operate in a near impossible moral environment, balancing truth-telling, support, and self-preservation. Gino faces the emotional cost of honesty delayed and partial. He must reconcile his desire for intimacy with the consequences of his past omission. This layering creates a high-stakes web of cause and effect. Each character's choices amplify tension for the others, creating a domino effect that drives anticipation for. Mini cliffhanger. Viewers are left with the looming question of whether the unfolding consequences will provoke insight, apology, or further conflict. By the end of, the audience is fully immersed in the consequences of prior actions. Sophie has been confronted with the social and relational fallout of her behavior, yet it remains unclear if she will learn or continue her manipulative pattern. Gino stands at the precipice of Natalie's judgment, with trust hanging by a thread. Liz is emotionally exhausted, balancing empathy with frustration and concern. The narrative positions all three characters in a state of heightened anticipation. Every decision could pivot the story in a new direction. Mini cliffhanger, Sophie's next confrontation, coupled with Natalie's pending decision, sets the stage for a high-stakes resolution and begins with a slow, heavy exhale. After the escalating tension of previous acts, we're finally at the stage where emotional truths start surfacing. Sophie, Liz, and Gino are all standing at the crossroads of consequence and reflection. The air is charged, yet there's a subtle shift. The chaos begins to take shape into clarity. This act doesn't just show what happens, it reveals the psychological impact of repeated mistakes and the long-term stakes of behavior patterns that audiences have been tracking throughout the series. Sophie is first in the spotlight. The social fallout from her actions at the bar and her manipulations in her friendship with Liz come into sharp focus. She's confronted, directly and indirectly, by both her peers and by her own reflection in the situation. For the first time, there's no escaping accountability. Liz, exhausted but resolute, makes her boundaries clear. She doesn't lash out. She doesn't yell. Instead, she articulates what has been obvious to viewers all along. Sophie's actions have consequences, and the emotional labor Liz has invested cannot continue to be ignored. This is a psychologically loaded moment. The confrontation is not about punishment, it's about